There are other possibilities. Sometimes you get a sample switch, which the lab can identify if they're looking for it. Sometimes the collector will accidentally put the mother's specimen in the child's specimen envelope and the child's specimen in the mother's specimen envelope. And so then the laboratory is comparing the wrong people. We do a simple check for that on every test that initially shows as a negative test, because you then, if it's negative, you compare the mother and the father and make sure they don't match, because that would be an indication that there was a sample switch.
Sure.
But a lot of labs don't do that. That's not a required procedure. Kim, are there other?
Well, there can always be a sample switch in the lab of the father's sample for a different man's sample. I don't think that is nearly as common as the mother-child switch. The mother-child switch, we've seen a number of times. We've seen incorrect reports from other laboratories a number of times, and they were just simply a mother-child switch that no one identified. When we were sent the report to review, it was a real simple process to determine what had happened, and then the client can go on and contact the other laboratory and have it fixed. But it can be quite devastating. We've had cases where people were they just couldn't believe that the test came back the way it did, and it was just a matter of when the specimens were collected, the mother was put in the child's envelope and the child was put in the mother's, and nobody noticed at the laboratory.
So switches like that, are they at all addressed in the standards that are held by the American Association of Blood Banks, or is that just something that the labs themselves would set in their procedures?
I believe it's just something the laboratories need to set in their procedures.
And Angelyn, the way we find out about them is in the case just like Kim mentioned, where they get the clients get a result, and the mom says, "No, there's no way in the world this could be true." And sometimes they don't know that, but when they do know that, then they start calling other laboratories, and if they come to us, we can redo the test for them. But if people don't absolutely know that it's not true, some of those just slip through. So a lot of them are never identified.
And there's other ways that can happen too that are just fraud on the client's part. The mother can bring a different child of hers in because she doesn't want the man to know he's the father, or the father can send a friend in because he doesn't want to be the father of the child. Mm-hmm. So that's where the chain of custody becomes very important.
Sure. And of course, obviously, people who are trying to dodge child support or things like that would fall into that class of maybe trying to get a friend to go in and take the test.
Right, but even in cases where the alleged father, for example, very much wants to be the father, wants to be involved in the child's life, in that Miami case, for example, the alleged father's attorney said that if he had not had a test from Paternity Testing Corporation first, he would have assumed that the other test was correct because he didn't know who else the mother was seeing and had no way to know for sure.
Sure.
So again, a lot of times a person will get an incorrect answer and not even know it, and it's just very important to do enough research to go to a good laboratory to start with.
Okay, and obviously I assume that's immeasurable, is the people who have gotten an incorrect result and just don't know it. Either they've been included as a father or they've been excluded as a father, and they just go about their business thinking that's the result.
Right.
Okay, and of course then if somebody's been excluded as a father falsely, then there you have a child who's growing up without a dad.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about the other group, the falsely included. How does that happen?
That was the example I think we talked about first, where if they have a lower probability of paternity at a 99%, for example, on average 1 in every 100 gentlemen would have this pattern, but in fact it could be much more common than that. It could be 1 in every 20 gentlemen. So all the laboratory knows is that the guy is still matching the child, and the laboratory has done the minimum that they agree to do, so they issue a report that says there's a probability that he's the dad, but if that's only at 99%, sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's just one of the other people in the population who has that pattern. So as Kim was mentioning, you want to look at your report and you want to make sure you got a good, strong test, and you want to go to a lab that provides that to start with.
Yeah, I'm actually dealing with a case right now where the man is just absolutely adamant that there's no way he could possibly be the father of a child, and he received a test that that has an adequate amount of testing to pass all standards and has him named as the father, and it's very difficult then for him to go back to court and get a judge to order a new test because there's nothing wrong with this test. And there's no way that we can even help him or do additional testing to try to determine if he's telling the truth or not, because it's hard to get any samples on the child. The mother got the answer she wanted. It's very difficult for a man then to go back and get additional testing. It's really, really important that they get it done right the first time.
Sure, because then you face the sort of res judicata issues, which is a legal term meaning that it's been tried and answered by the court, and they're not necessarily going to reopen their results. Particularly if a certain time has passed and the child is beyond the age of 18, and maybe there's a father who just may never know for sure.
That's correct, and that is kind of how the judge often feels about it. So sometimes, even when they go back right away and ask for a retest, sometimes they have difficulty getting the court to order it, and then if the other side of the case doesn't want to cooperate and the court won't order it, then they're just stuck with the test they got originally. I write letters occasionally to judges or Social Security administrators explaining how the testing works and why it's always a good idea to allow someone to get a second test if they want to. The AABV strongly recommends that people be allowed to get a second test, but again, that's once in a while. I don't know. Sometimes that's not going to happen because you can't get the judge or the administrator involved in the case to agree to let you do that.
Sure. I know that the paternity statute in the state of Missouri says that either the mother or the father can request a test, a DNA test, as part of a paternity proceeding. However, it doesn't say that they're entitled to any more than a test. So I can very easily see a judge saying, no, we're not going to go for a second test. Even if one side were to file a motion for another DNA test, I can easily see a judge saying, no, we're not going to waste time doing that. We need to move this case along, and we already have an answer. So I'm sure that's very common for a lot of people.
Correct. Once in a while you even get cases where they had two tests at the same laboratory and the lab accidentally, if the alleged father sent in someone else to be pretending to be him, and that was found out, and the alleged father was required to then go in himself for a second test. Once in a while, another lab has accidentally pulled the original sample because they still had it. It was still named the right name, and then it's extremely difficult for the mother to get a third test ordered. But we have a couple of times been able to compare the first and second laboratory report and show the judge or the lawyer or whoever that the DNA indicates that this guy was the same guy both times. They didn't actually test a second person for whatever reason. So it's surprising that happens, but once in a while it does.
Now, are you guys proponents of government standards for paternity tests? Is that something you would like to see passed?
We're proponents of standards. I don't know if it matters whether the government's involved. I mean, for example, in the case of the New York Department of Health, their required accreditation mostly duplicates what laboratories are already doing with the American Association of Blood Banks, and so I'm not sure that serves a purpose. Kim, do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I have a very strong opinion about that, actually. If all 50 states set up an accreditation program, they would put all those labs out of business, and we'd have inspectors here every day of the year.
Okay.
It would be totally impractical. If there were a government-sponsored program, it would really need to be national. To have more programs like New York would be impossible. You couldn't. The laboratories couldn't deal with it. Like I said, you'd have inspectors here all the time.
Okay. All right, and could you give us your website and also any other important website? I know you've already mentioned the one for the AABV that somebody could go to find out a little more about all this.
Our website is www.ptclabs, like in Paternity Testing Corporation, ptclabs.com.
Well, thank you very much, Joe and Kim, for agreeing to be with us this evening.
Angelyn, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It was very informative, and I'm sure that our listeners learned a lot, as did I. So thank you also to our listeners for joining in, and please remember to join us again next week. Good evening.